Coming up, a singer-songwriter on the song that turned his underground band named after a Monty Python sketch into one of the iconic alternative bands of the early 90s on Professor of Rock, brought to you by Zenny. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. Make sure to join our community below by subscribing for our daily content. Click the bell so you don't miss out. And make sure to look us up on Patreon. We give you more content, and that helps us to keep this channel going. We really appreciate it. So 1991 was a monumental year in music. It seemed like everything changed overnight. College rock went mainstream, although it was packed into the catch-all moniker that I've talked about before, alternative music. Along with many other subgenres, it was quite a time. You know, REM released Out of Time. Shiny, happy people holding shiny, which turned the band into megastars on parallel with U2. Perry Farrell of Jane's Addiction co-founded Lollapalooza.
The Lollapalooza tour. Jane's Addiction are playing live. More after this.
Of course, later in the year, Nirvana went to #1 with Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden not too far behind. Goodbye glam metal, hello grunge, and alternative. It was a really interesting time as the culture completely changed. I mean, in 1990 and even part of 91, the 90s weren't really the 90s yet. We've discussed this before. It was still the 80s, you know, as far as the music was concerned. And it wasn't the good 80s, it was the bad 80s. Before all these changes, it seemed like the 90s would be completely different. I remember being in high school at this moment, and I was really coming of age with what was going on in the world. It was just eye-opening. Mike Edwards of Jesus Jones nailed it, I think, when he sang, "I saw the decade end when it seemed the world could change in the blink of an eye." When it seemed the world could change at the blink of an eye. I love that lyric. It was a really cool time because technology hadn't completely taken over yet. It was there, it was coming in, but there was still some wonder left in this universe. I can hear a song from that time, and it doesn't just take me back to like a specific memory. Sometimes I can remember everything about, a certain time down to what I ate for breakfast. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not by much. It was during this time that, anything seemed possible with our whole lives ahead of us. That's where I was in my life anyway. There were a lot of bands that were part of the musical takeover. Toad the West Sprocket, they also rode in with the cavalry. That was the year that they came in. I was an instant fan. They crawled out of the underground with their platinum-selling album, Fear. I love this album. The band had formed in 1986 and consisted of lead singer, guitarist Glenn Phillips. There was guitarist Todd Nichols, bassist Dean Denning, and drummer Randy Gus. Toad the West Sprocket took its name from a Monty Python comedy sketch that was entitled Rock Notes. I mean, how cool is that? This is where a journalist delivers a nonsensical music news report where they said, remember, Rex Stardust, lead electric triangle with Toad the West Sprocket has had to have an elbow removed following their recent successful worldwide tour of Finland.
With Toad the West Sprocket has had to have an elbow removed following their recent successful worldwide tour of Finland.
Flamboyant, ambidextrous Rex apparently fell off the back of a motorcyclist, most likely. Anyway, it goes on.
Ambidextrous Rex apparently fell off the back of a motorcycle. Fell off the back of a motorcyclist, most likely.
As they were preparing for their first live show, the band still hadn't come up with a name, they hadn't agreed on anything, and the members facetiously went with Toad the West Sprocket because they thought it would be hilarious, which it was. Glenn Phillips would say that it was a joke that went on too long, and according to their website, it was probably meant to be temporary at that time, but it stuck. Actually, the name was used before. Some of you probably know this, but it was used by a short-lived British blues band, late 1970s, but they had parted ways long before Glenn and the band decided on that name. Interestingly enough, Eric Idle from the Monty Python Circus once quipped about the band. He said, and I quote, I once wrote a sketch about rock musicians, and I was trying to think of a name that would be so silly nobody would ever use it or dream it could ever be used. So I wrote the words Toad the West Sprocket. And a few years later, I was driving along the freeway in LA, and a song came on the radio, and the DJ said, no joke, that was by Toad the West Sprocket. He says that he nearly drove off the freeway. I love that. When Toad the West Sprocket released All I Want, the song, it became a classic of the early 90s. It went to number 15 on the Billboard Hot 100, went to number 4 on the top 40 mainstream charts. I had a chance to talk with lead singer and songwriter Glenn Phillips about this song and this time in his life at length. So let's get into that now. And as we go into this interview, I'd like to recognize our amazing sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. They helped to make this possible. Since Zenni has been our sponsor, I've heard from so many viewers who have loved their experience with Zenni. They've really lived up to the praise, and I'm glad. They really are amazing. Make sure to go to zenni.com to design your own pair today and check out the great features like Blue Blocks. Here's Glenn.
Nothing so loud.
Well, 91, Going Into Fear, one of the iconic albums of the 90s. It was a record that I grew up in Blackfoot, Idaho, a small town. And in the time where you waited for those records to come out, your Spotify was Columbia House. Remember the 10, 12 CD, 8 CDs for a cent or whatever?
Yeah.
And that's how I first heard Toad. I heard Fear. And my little group of friends, we were discovering the Smiths and REM and Toad. That album meant a lot to us because it's what got me to go and listen to the first 2 records and go out and search those out, because in those times it was literally searching those records out in a record store.
Yeah, and if you didn't, I mean, the other thing was you search the records out in physical space, and then if you didn't like them, you just spent $10, which was a lot of money. So you were going to listen to it until you did like it.
Exactly.
I remember that, like, you'd get your favorite band and you'd get their next album and you're like, oh God. And you would do the work to understand where they were coming from, because you couldn't afford to trade it.
Yeah, the cover art meant something. You poured through the lyrics before the internet, so you were trying to find out everything you could, because the band was mysterious just because there was that missing layer of the internet and social media. Fear was kind of, you look at the album, and I almost thought when I first looked at the album, it almost didn't go with the songs in my mind, because I was like, this looks like, almost like it was before grunge, but it almost looked kind of like that L7, kind of
more of a metal cover.
Yeah, metal cover
or something. Yeah.
And so as I started listening to the record and I heard All I Want, the first drum fill that you hear, it's like, whenever you hear that on the radio, for me, it's like, you first hear the first couple beats, you're like, is that Love and Rocket's So Alive, or is it Toad the West Sprocket? Because it's kind of similar.
It's not the most, it's a pretty, I've heard that beat before.
Nothing so loud.
All I Want. Tell me how that came together.
You know, just a song about moments of clarity and how quickly they pass. It sounds a lot happier than it is. It's more about like trying to figure out how clarity, ecstasy, you know, all of those things, that they're more of a connect the dots. And it's something I still think about later. There's this attitude that we're going to arrive and then we're just going to be chill. Everything's going to be good. We're going to have it work, you know, to connect the dots kind of thing. And at some point, if you can infer a line of clarity, you're doing pretty well, as opposed to completely losing ground between every high point. And so, you know, All I Want is essentially about that. Just like, I figured it out, and then it's gone. You remember you figured it out. The recording of that record was really difficult. We tried to get it. I couldn't get it. Like, I was breaking down in tears in the studio because we couldn't get the 12-string or the harmony, and like nothing would be in tune. And we had a day or two of just the worst time. And then finally we're like, check the bass tuning. And somehow the bass had gone on out of tune.
Really?
And so everything we were adding sounded wrong. It was just the silliest thing. So we re-recorded the bass and then it all went well. Yeah, it was a difficult song to record.
All I want is to feel this way, to be
Well, and the other thing about that song that's weird is it's the kind of band we thought we were. We really identified as an indie band. You know, that's where we were from. That's where our heart was. Those were the bands we loved. I was a theater kid, and even the band met. We were in our town and Oklahoma together. So I was singing in choir and playing guitar, and I was more of a Rush fanatic about the time where I met Todd and realized he could play guitar. Rush was my absolute favorite band.
Wow.
And I liked the storytelling. Neil Peart's storytelling was great. I mean, Hemispheres and 2112 and all of that was huge to me. And I was into Ozzy and Iron Maiden, and that was kind of more my world. And he introduced me to Husker Du, and he introduced me to REM, U2, The Replacements, and Elvis Costello, and this whole kind of other world of music. And probably of those early records, the one that got me the most at the time where I started writing was Let It Be by The Replacements. And Unsatisfied was, as a 16-year-old, I just played Unsatisfied over and over and over and over again. He was raw and vulnerable and doing a song that I hadn't heard anyone else try to do.
Yeah.
And so there was something about that that really got me. And as time went on, also like the Waterboys, This Is the Sea.
Oh, yeah.
And
XTC, you're a fan of them
XTC,
as well.
I love. XTC, though, is always, they're a little more left brain. And it was that, and most of the music, like growing up in a more sciencey house, the stuff I started with was very, very much left brain. Neil Peart's thing. You can write about the heart, but you're writing about it in a very, it's an organ that pumps blood kind of way.
Yeah.
And so, it was hearing those songs that made me want to weep. And it was also realizing that I was trying to write more dance or rock or funny, and that this was also kind of finding where my voice was and what I was actually good at. It seemed like being vulnerable and being kind of embarrassingly honest was something that I could do that was my own voice in that. So I focused more on that. But anyway, that song almost didn't make the record. We had that and Good Intentions. Good Intentions, we didn't put on the record. That was one of our biggest singles, and we didn't put on the record because it was too pop. We're all like, that could be on the radio. That can't go on the record.
It's hard to rely on my good intentions.
And All I Want, once again, it's not like everybody in the company was going, it was like a deep album track. We played it. I mean, if they thought that would be the single, they would have put it out first, right? They wouldn't have wasted all the time and money on the other singles. Retroactively, they all knew. And All I Want, as we were sequencing the record, putting songs on it, it wasn't on most of the playlists. Like it was going to be a B-side because it was too pop. So it was really strange for us. The 90s were hard for bands with that. There were so many, whether it was Pearl Jam or Counting Crows, people not playing their single live or defacing it, or like throwing acid in its face.
REM hating Shiny Happy People, stuff like that.
Yeah, there was this thing of like, you wanted people to hear your music, but you didn't want to be a sellout. And like, you want that perfect thing, and you want to be able to choose your fans. You want to be able to choose who's there.
Probably didn't help that years later it was on Dawson's Creek, but it was on Homeland. So.
And the thing is, it helps now because I can make a living making music. And if we didn't have that, I don't know if I'd be able to. But it was very strange dealing with our perception of ourselves and where we fit.
Hey, thanks for watching. Leave us a comment about Toad the West Sprocket, about Glenn Phillips, and All I Want below, and about Fear. Tell us your memories of 1991 when it was all changing. If you like our content, we invite you to join our community by subscribing to the channel below. Also, you can become an honorary patron on Patreon to help us keep the music alive. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.